Hi and welcome to another monthly wrap up. This one is the one for June, and god damn it, June's a nightmare month for me. It's my busiest time in work. It absolutely knocks the piss out of me, but I managed to get a lot of reading done in the first couple of weeks or so, and because of that we have a wrap up. We have a rundown this month of, well, 5, but I'm going to include 6 books because I forgot about one last month, and because, you know, I've only got 5 books this month, it helps build it out. And I'm going to talk about our first book at the moment, which is The Valkyrie of Vanaheim by Phil Parker. Now this is part of Spfbo 8, and it's the book that I've heard literally nobody talk about. Nobody's caught it yet as far as I know. I haven't checked anyway. I haven't seen the reviews that have come up about that. But Valkyrie of Vanaheim seems to follow on from another series that Phil Parker has written. While it's not seen as necessary, and certainly I hadn't read it at all, I think you can see that there's more to this world and there's more explained about this world, so that if you like this book you can go back and read that trilogy. What we have is a portal fantasy, one that straddles the world between human and the Fae. We have a central character who's part human, part Fae, so she's got this conflict of her own background, and she's going to be part of an archaeological dig that is going to go explore some of the world and explain more about, you know, the relationship between the human and the Fae, etc. Except there are factions on both sides that aren't very happy about this peace that's been found between the human and the Fae. There is a faction on the Fae side that isn't happy about the humans. There's a faction on the human side that isn't happy about the Fae. It's a bit of right-wing politics kind of thrown in that adds another layer to what's going on. So we have the central character that's going to find out a bit more about herself and her background and her place in the world, maybe about her family history. And we have these two factions that are going to play some part in, you know, this archaeological dig that they're going to do. And I'll not go much further in the story than that, because this is an absolute action-packed read. It's only about 270 pages or something in the Kindle read, but it's absolutely rammed full of action from start to finish. I think in the first 8 chapters there are 6 set pieces that vary in different levels of threat. So we have an explosion, we have a fire, we have the hooded dark stranger that's coming from the shadow that may or may not attack. They have a central character who's this female who, by virtue of her Fae background, can shoot frickin' laser beams out of her hands, it seems like, and that seems to be her power, which gives her a power that other people don't have, that comes to the rescue or otherwise at certain times. But again, that's all to be explored. If I have a criticism of the book, it's the fact that it eschews the action for the character plot development, so everything sort of happens quickly. But I think that's in the nature of what the author tried to do, which was to try and write something that was very action orientated, that, you know, a lot happened in, and that constantly driving and moving forward. Which I think is a shame, because some of Phil Parker's writing here is extraordinary. In fact, I pulled out a little piece that I was reading through and I highlighted, and I thought this is some of the nicest prose that I've read all year. If this had another 100 and 150 pages, it would have went up on my ratings by certainly another full star. But again, that's my personal preference. I have found that while my desire is for not read as many longer form fantasy books, as soon as I shorten that down, the compromises that are made to make that happen are ones that I'm missing. So it turns out I like long fantasy books. Who knew it? But that's not to say this doesn't have a real place, because if it wasn't this length, I never would have read it. I never would have found the author's voice. I never would have found the story that's in here. And actually, when it ramps up right towards the end, I really love all of the little layers that are thrown in on top. So the elements of horror, the elements of action, the elements of exploring the self and personality. I think the last 100 pages are excellent in this. Valkyrie of Vanaheim is, frustratingly for me, I only give it 3.5 stars. I rounded it up to 4 because it's definitely closer to a 4-star read for me. It's something that I think I'll continue reading because I'm into the characters now. I've bonded with them. I found the first half, certainly, I could barely name a character who they were, distinguishing some of the female characters from each other. It was hard, but here we are at the end, and I'm there and went, let's go. So with that read, you know, what would I read next? And I certainly had another couple of books that I read. I've got a couple of 5-star reads here coming. A lot of 5-star reads, in fact, coming. But I'll go to another indie series or book of series now. And this started as a sort of unofficial buddy read on Dominic Book's Discord, where he discovered that the first book in this series was free on Audible Plus, and many of us have Audible as a membership, and we get Audible Plus. It's free, so book one in a series that we could listen in audio that didn't seem to be too long, that was well-known indie author, Rob J. Hayes. It seemed like the perfect thing to do. So Along the Razor's Edge is book one in the War Eternal, which is now a 5-book series, but I think the first 3 books settle as a series. And I and many others in the Discord read the first 2 books. We'd only intended to do one before doing the other buddy read, which seemed to take a hit as a consequence. And book 1 is Along the Razor's Edge. And Along the Razor's Edge tells the story of a young girl called Skara, who is a sorceress for an army, and she's been trained like that most of her life. And at the very start of the book, the army, or the war that she's in, they lose, and she's thrown into captivity into a pit. And she's thrown into the pit with common criminals, people that have done wrong in the rest of life, mercenaries, people that murder people, stole, just a bad old lot. And her best friend, Joseph, who seems like a big brother kind of character, are thrown in there. They were 2 sorcerers, although nobody really knows anything of anybody else. Now the story tells about her place in the pit, and how life's hard, there's no food, how it's a labour camp, how the people that are above them are violent and take retribution on the people that are in the camp for their own means, and actually just how awful and drudgery and dreary the whole experience is for Eska and everybody else down there. You meet some of the characters, and some of the characters down there are very nicely fleshed out. You have 2 brothers, Hart and Nyson. You have the crazy old man Tamura. You have a wide variety of characters, including some, not so nice characters in terms of the overlords that are above her. And the story tells about her desire to escape from this place, whether it's even possible. And actually, the fact, and it builds over the course of the start of the book, the fact that she has real angst and hate for her situation that she's in. It seems to come out of just this place, but as the book goes through, you get to explore that there's more to this angst and feeling inside her of where it comes from. And I think it's one of the themes that comes right across all of the books. So I can't really talk about book 2 without talking about book 1, but book 1 sets this up really nicely. And within it, obviously, because she's a sorcerer, she is this kind of very young lady. She's about 15 or something in the book, 14, 15. She has that teenage angst in her. And if only she could get hold of a magical source, which is just a thing that they swallow that gives them the power. It's a bit like Allomancy, it seems to me, from Mistborn, whereas they ingest it, and something within it gives them power. If only she could get that, she could cause ruination all amongst the place, but she can't get that. So can't she get out, or otherwise? It's a really brilliant premise for a story. It sets up, a world, even though it's very self-contained, in this pit that has lots of possibilities, and it's hinted at lots of other things in there. The first book's a deeply personal story though for her. I mean, I find Eska a kind of difficult character because she's not particularly likable. The other book's really brilliantly read and voiced by Maura Quirk. I think she does a great job of lending some character and some sympathy to Eska, but I think she's a bit whiny in general. Having said that, she's very, very readable. And there's a real propulsion and drive through the first book, certainly. Main problem I have with the first book is that Rob J. Hayes has this thing about foreshadowing. People end chapters with, and that was the last time we ever seen each other again. Something like that. I'm not saying that particularly happens in this book, but that kind of idea. He must do it about 10, 12 times in this book. And most people, I will say, really didn't have a problem with it. But I was like, for sake, give me something to reveal. Now, okay, I'll grant that maybe some of the things that he talks about aren't massively revealing, but I think there's some of them that's just unnecessary. It takes something away from the reading experience that comes along forward. Some people loved it. It really irked me, and maybe it just irked me because it was so intentional as you were going along. It was like we get to the middle of a chapter and then go, well, there's another one. There's another thing that I don't find out. I'm being told now ahead of the event that happens. And certainly there's a lot of stuff that happens. Second book struggles a bit for me, and I think partly my struggles were because I was out of energy. I was trying to squeeze in some reading time when I was just super busy. Just ridiculously busy. and I just hadn't got the time, so I was kind of stuck in this bit of, right, I'm trying to read 20 pages here, falling asleep in the middle of it, and therefore I lost the drive and the impetus. I struggled mightily through the second book. I think the second book does meander a bit in terms of, you know, where it wants to go. It doesn't have a clear direction like the first one does, but there are twists and things that happen to make it, oh yeah, this is quite good. We get to learn more about the world. I've rated both books on Goodreads as 4 stars, and you know, certainly book 1's better than book 2. I don't think there's any doubt. I intend to continue with book 3 coming up this coming month, mainly because we're all reading it together, and it's kind of some of the ideas and some of the fun that's in that Discord. And if you're not joined in, certainly join in. It's a great Discord, with full of really fabulous characters and people with different opinions, and everybody's very respectful and all the rest, but we do wind each other up, which is wonderful. There's definitely much a tongue-in-cheek part of sharing experiences in there. So the War Eternal, 5 books long. The last book's to come out at the end of the year. I'll get to the end of it this year. I think we're all in this drive together, trying to find out what happens to Skara, and you know, we'll see where that goes. And all we've left now is 5-star reads. 5 stars. And this one is by, again, somebody that's involved in a lot of Discord channels that talked about, a lot of people talk about the cover of this book and how wonderful it is. It is The Seventh Cadence by Jim Wilborn. Now, this is a chunker. This is a big book. And it's, what, 700 pages or something. It feels like a big book. It's not a slow read by any points of views, but it definitely has a lot in it. Now, I'm going to do a larger review for Seventh Cadence because I think, as an exploration as to why I think it works, I've already told you it's going to be 5 stars. I think it's really quite interesting where it lands from, the things that I really love about it. But in essence, we have a world that is set up with multiple factions. A bit like Wheel of Time. Where you have lots of different factions that have their own agendas at play, and they all have a different desire, want, or outcome. We centre along a couple of main characters. We have a king who just wants peace in his land, wants to work with others, and at the very start of the book an incident happens and he has a son born, so he has children, so he's obviously got an heir, and he wants him to grow up and flourish in a good world. We have, alongside him, we have what is shown as being prophets, so people that are seers or that can see the future and predict what's going to happen. There's this whole world. They seem to have an awful lot of power, as you'd expect in that world, and they kind of set about setting plans in place that we'll see ever have favourable outcomes for them, of course. But if everybody has prophets, then everybody's doing this planning, and there's where some of the intrigue comes in. Aside from that, we have a story of a young woman who's on the run called Telly. Now, Telly is a keeper. In fact, seems to be very much the last of the keepers, who are people who are like repositories of knowledge, and if she dies, all the knowledge is going to die with her. Her parents, her brother, sister, the whole family's been killed, and she's been given the task of escaping and trying to find somewhere to pass on this knowledge to other people. So she seems to be the last, and helping her, one of the prophets has sent a young man called Navid to help her out. Now that's the setup of the book, and that's the first 50, 60, 70 pages of 700, so there's a lot more to go. We definitely have a questy, multiple POV type storyline, one that is really easy to read, and one that centres a lot on these younger characters trying to find their place and their way in this world, trying to find out who they are as people, trying to find out, you know, how they will contribute to what they want as their positive, you know, outcomes for the people, for themselves, etc. Again, very Wheel of Time in that regard. It's incredibly readable. I find it really easy to read, and one of the reasons that I find it really easy to read is actually the printing of the book. I mean, I'll show you here. The text isn't too small, but a lot of hardbacks, or a lot of paperbacks have printed in the corners. Hope you can see that there, and they don't, and so you can kind of flick your way through it and make your way through it, and it makes for quite a nice paperback reading experience. It's one of the easiest paperback books to read I've had of this size, and you know, big thumbs up for the readability of this. But that's the Seventh Cadence. I'm going to do a separate review for it. Like I say, I absolutely loved it. It really ramped up towards the end. I liked all the character building, the world building, the kind of exploration of self that an awful lot went on. A lot of the side characters, some who are going to be explored more in this book, some that obviously coming up next because it's book 1 of the Continuous Cycle Chronicle, sorry. And yeah, cool book. Next book to talk about is a sci-fi book. Seems a very popular book, and in fact I read the first book by this author and loved it. Listened to it in audio. Hadn't really read anything by that author beforehand, and it is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Obviously the book that I'm talking about that I read previously was The Martian. Now Project Hail Mary is very much in the form of The Martian, and in fact when I started this, I'd say about the first 50 pages or so, I went, I can't do this. Like, there's that phrase in The Martian. I'm not even sure if it was in the book. It's definitely in the film, and it's corny as all hell, where he goes, I'm going to sense the shit out of this, or something to that effect, in order to survive. And yes, that's what this is. So it's very much, I know a bit of science, I'm going to write a plot that fits around that at the start of it. It's about a world where there's a virus in the sun that seems to be taking away a lot of the energy out of the sun, so much so that it's going to affect the life cycle of the sun. The sun is going to burn out and lose its energy, and of course with that goes life. In fact, even as the sun dims and loses its power, there's a problem for Earth because crops won't grow, food will be a problem. It explores a lot of the implications of climate change in the early part of the book. And so you've got a man who is tasked with finding people to man a mission out into space to try and investigate what the virus is and why it has some peculiar things on it. And certainly at the start I kind of thought, this formula is the Martian formula. And I've read and enjoyed The Martian, but I think, can I read this again? I can kind of see the writing style clearly a bit too much, and if it had stopped I'd have really missed out, because this book goes places. It's loved by so many, and I can see why. So there's a real stakes of peril in it, there's real exploration, obviously the science bit. I think by the end of the science bit, I love science, learning about it, discovering about it as much as the next person, it kind of felt a bit like, yeah, whatever at that stage, because the interesting parts of this were about relationships between characters and people. Now, Project Hail Mary has, and I don't think this is too much hyperbole, it is one of the greatest characters ever written. And one of the greatest, honestly. And if anybody's read Project Hail Mary, I'd be amazed if they disagreed, because the way that they're written, the way that the relationships develop within the story, is the real crux of why this book is great. And it's the bit that elevates this. Now, when I finished this book, and it's very hard to talk about because I'll be giving away what makes it so good. By the time I got to the end of it, I was so wrapped up in the early part of the book and how much annoyed me that I kind of forgot what made it so great. And this character comes in fairly quickly in general, and I originally rated it 4 stars, and I got a week later and I was like, what am I thinking about? If I've got one of the greatest characters ever written in literary terms that I've ever read, how can it not be a 5-star book? And every time they're in the thing, you go, big thumbs up. It's so cleverly done, so well written, that I'm really on board. Project Hail Mary is an absolutely brilliant book. One that's a real page turner. I did it in about 3 days, even though it's reasonably long, it's just short of 500 pages. And something really well worth picking up. Which leaves me with one book. And this book, well, this is one of the greatest books I've ever read. I know it's beloved by many, or by an author that's beloved by many. I'm one of those that I kind of thought, I'll probably not like. Or otherwise, people that don't dislike it for very particular reasons. And while I didn't think That would be me. Somebody that's kind of getting back into reading in the past couple of 3, 4, 5 months. I kind of thought maybe this would be something that would be a step too far. It would put me in a slumber otherwise. I should stop talking about it. It's Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Holy smokes, what a book. You know, it looks like nothing. It's small. In fact, when you buy it, it feels an awful lot thinner. It's like almost like when you turn the pages and whatever paper they've used, they puff out a little bit. But I like to think that that's my imagination getting put in the book, that making it thick out a little bit, because Assassin's Apprentice is a character study that just, it implores you to invest yourself in the book and in the story and the writing. Now, some people say that the language and the written and the prose is overly flawed. The hell with that idea. This is so amazingly written. It was like, the word that I keep on coming back to, and I've used this I think every month about some book, is absolutely delicious. It's like the ripest, most sweet apple that you've ever read. I was forcing myself to read the thing even slower than I was at certain points. It tells a story of this young boy Fitz, who's a bastard to obviously a nobleman, in this case called chivalry, and you know, it's about how one half of the world wants to eschew any knowledge of him, and the other half that wants to give him a chance and doesn't want to see him too far let out, because he has some skills. That the royalty or the regal nature of society means that the people born in that bloodline have a superpower called the skill. Now, without going into what the skill is, it gives them certain abilities. So this boy has abilities in it that people want to use and manipulate. And while it's called Assassin's Apprentice, it's not an action thing at all. It's very much an exploration of a young boy who's lost, deserted, and doesn't really feel like anybody loves him, or that there's any real place in society. Anybody that he has around him wants to use him for something, and in some ways that's okay, because he'll grab on and that'll be his place in society. If people want to use him, that'll be enough of a relationship for him, which is incredibly sad. But one of the things that Hobb does, I think, very clearly, and this has come from somebody who's not an animal lover, one of the foremost characteristics is that the Fitz has a very great relationship with animals. Now, without saying anything else about somebody's character, if somebody has a good relationship and is caring of animals and is respectful of animal life, they are automatically seen as a good person. So it gives a very clear line as to who Fitz is as a person, and everybody else around him is different shades of grey, good or bad. And oh my god, there's such joy in this, and what is ultimately like a sad story of some words. There's so much pain and hurt because of the rejection of who he is and how people want to use him. But the thing that I really, really, really love about Assassin's Apprentice and about the writing in it is that Hobb manages to make really spectacular use of emotions that you don't normally make a big deal out of. So big ones in books that they always play on: fear, there's the feeling of love. You know, these all play big parts in a lot of literary terms. Things that you don't really get a big sense of is that rush of pride. You know, you feel proud at how somebody behaves. I mean, if there's one emotion that jumps out at me out of Assassin's Apprentice, it's pride. It's that one there. When you read certain bits and you realise what happened in certain cases, or you realise how some people acted, you just feel, and it rushes from your bum right up through your chest into feeling like, oh my god, that is a spectacular piece of writing that displayed or brought forth that emotion that I didn't even know was that important in certain literary terms. And it happens about 3 or 4 times throughout the book where you just have this bit where it's built up, and things, whether you thought they were one way or you thought you're trying to second guess people and characters' motivations, and you go, holy crap, yes, get in, come on, in what is some people call a slow kind of written book. And I know the books after this get accused of it even more and more and more, but when you love the writing as much as this, I can't imagine not thinking, give me more of this. I heard somebody describe it last night when I was watching one of the streams. Sorry I can't give you credit for it, but it's like one of those things, it felt like a really slow read, but by the time you got to the end of it, you just wanted more of it. You'd wanted there to be another 100 pages of it. And it's not just because there's there's a ramp up towards the end, because I don't even think that's the case here. There's definitely a florid kind of slower nature the whole way through. I absolutely adored Assassin's Apprentice, and but for other reading commitments, I would have went for next. It also struggles from that thing of me, you know, given how much I really enjoyed this book, I don't want to burn through them all either. I do want to know what happened, but I want to embrace and enjoy it. So while Royal Assassin will be coming up soon, that is my book of the month for June, and that is my reading month. I have a couple of things that are very close to finishing at the start of the next month. Things that are planned for some content, some things that are planned for some other ideas. What goes on next, apart from Assassin's Apprentice leading on to Royal Assassin? Where should it go with some of these other things? Let me know in the comments. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.